Welcome to the Existence Project podcast, where we share stories from our Keeping It Human workshops and hope to prove that community can be founded on connection, dignity, and belonging for all, where everyone's story is heard. Dennis, a writer, poet, and storyteller who has experienced intermittent homelessness throughout his lifetime, sat down with us to discuss his process coming out and speaking publicly to his experience on the street. Transformation, empowerment, and the ability to have a choice all underlie a complex, candid, and hopeful discussion with a man who has overcome homelessness. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. Dennis, you're a literary man who has lived an atypical life, and now you're moving into storytelling. What's drawn you to storytelling, and why do you think you want to tell your story?
Oh, interesting. By the way, that was Robert Frost.
That's correct.
Of Mice and Men. Just remember that. It was suggested to me that it might be something cathartic to tell my story. It might be a way to give back. I want to share my story so that perhaps it can be used as a cautionary tale. One of choices made under duress. I think the more I think about it, the less I want to tell my story.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a bit reticent, and I shy away from any kind of spotlight. And it's served me well in the past to be quiet and or invisible. But I'm hoping that by telling my story, someone else will say, well, Dennis can talk of his trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis can talk of his addictions, of his mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis can talk about the stigma attached to all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can give voice, or if I can help someone else raise their voice, then I think it would be a good thing.
And all those things you just spoke to, those are themes of stories. And those are, I'm assuming, some of the themes that have emerged for you throughout this process. Are there any additional larger themes that you feel have come out for you?
I do. And I think, Marco, you had pointed it out, is one of the biggest themes is empowerment. For a long time, and I didn't realize it, I had always just considered myself a coward, but I was lost. I didn't have the power. I was drifting. I wasn't present in myself. So I think the larger theme is empowerment, the ability to make that choice. And my choice is sobriety. And to find the strength, to find that inner metal, the fortitude needed to make that choice every day. Extremely important. So I think the larger theme of empowerment, taking back your life. When I first moved into the house, Terry said to me, "You're going to get your life back." And I was wondering, what did he mean by this? I was a little dumbfounded.
And you're referring, for the house, you're talking about Anawim House.
I am talking about Anawim House.
And can you tell us a little bit about what Anawim House is?
Anawim House is a recovery house. It's a transitional house. It is a drop-in program for the street. Anawim House has been in operation, I guess, over 25 years. It reaches out. And if you reach out to Anawim House, it will enfold you. Anawim House, to me, is a house of healing. Very much so. And I have embraced the house, and the house has embraced me. And they're here to help. And they're here to show you that there can be other ways to life other than addiction. And it's okay to face the barrier of mental health. That was hard for me. That was hard for me to admit.
And all those things you mentioned as well, addiction, mental health, sometimes those go under the blanket of homelessness. And a lot of folks that come through here have experience of homelessness that are transitioning off the streets. And I'm curious, because it's such a blanket term, there's so little known about it. And in your story, there are themes of different types of homelessness. And I'm wondering, can you expand a little bit on like what homelessness might mean in various circumstances?
Well, that's interesting, right? I mean, I was homeless at 9 years old. I was homeless and didn't even realize it. I'm under my mother's wing. There's homelessness when you walk away and you just give it all up. I guess they call it off the grid. There's that. There's adventure attached to it.
Can you expand on that first one? So you're homeless under your mother's wing. What does that mean?
It means when my mom and my dad separated, my mother took her brood. There was 8 of us at the time, ranging from 12 to infancy. And she took us to her sister's place. And I had to share a bed with an older cousin, sleeping head to toe. I'm sure in the first week, a few of those kicks were not inadvertent. So there was a certain ignorance, wasn't there? I mean, you didn't know, you were a child. And so you relied on that parental guidance.
So there was an element in that first experience of like transient, you're not in your own place. And were you moving around a lot?
And we were until she settled. But that has been a theme of throughout my life. It's never really finding a home. I mean, the platitude is home is where the heart is. Well, not so much. Steinbeck says home is where they have to let you in when you knock on the front door. That would be nice. So what is your perspective of home? What is home? That is the key element, is what is home. I lived on the streets. I slept in Beacon Hill Park for years. And I had a little home. I had a certain tree. It's funny how you all were creatures of habit. And so everyone would find a tree, and I slept under a hemlock, and it was my home in the park. My space, as it were. There is so much to be said about illness and addiction and homelessness. And when you hear, well, just get a job, just get a haircut, it's exasperating, because sometimes there is no solution. There really isn't, other than just compassion. And that's what Anawim House does. It shows that compassion as far as that goes. I'm not sure, Marco.
Yeah. Sounds like there was this, really, that was a nice description of your home under the willow tree. So there's like literally homelessness being, I don't have a house and I sleep outside, but there's also homelessness in that I'm young and I don't know what's going on, but something doesn't feel like a safe place, maybe? Or would you say that's correct?
I'd say that's really so now we're talking, perhaps homelessness is a state of being, a state of mind. It's an existential thing, isn't it? My first 6 months of homelessness was an adventure with Peter. It was an adventure for me. We walked from Port Alberni to Courtenay, put our stuff in a shopping cart, and we slept under the stars. Oyster Bay, Fanny Bay. It was a wonderful time. So again, frame of mind, isn't it? And then there's times now where when I relapsed at Rogers Park in Port Alberni, and I was so sad and so lonely, shameful in my relapse. It was palpable, my homelessness. It was real. The adventure had ended. So homelessness can be a frame of mind. Interesting.
It's interesting looking at these different places that you've ended up. There's there's a part in your story where you also experience homelessness, ending up at a boarding house where you've landed with a bunch of other
Oh goodness.
misfits, as you called them. Can you tell us a bit about like what that experience was like, as far as being accepted amongst this group? And
That was boy, that was something, I tell you. To be so young and to be thrust into a situation where you're being told by the government, by the system, by CSA, this is your home, this is your room, this is where you live, and the house is decrepit. I mean, the front steps, the front porch it needs work, to say the least. So I ended up, my next door neighbors, I had a little room. My next door neighbors across the hall were two bikers, and they had a dismantled Harley in their room. The guy up front, he had wall-to-wall albums. Upstairs there were workers, sex workers. I had found inadvertently, isn't that a funny way to look at it? But they took me under their wing. I must have, I was young, bespectacled, probably looked scared as hell, because I was. They took me under their wing, and it was kind of neat. For someone so young to realize that even amongst misfits, and I considered myself one, there could be a sense of home, of belonging. We're all looking in some way for belonging. I felt like I belonged there. Crazy as that sounds, there was a sense of family amongst these Denzians.
And that's an interesting point, because I think when you think of homelessness, you think of the physical aspects of like where I'm situated. But if you expand that perspective, there's also looking at poverty and how people treat you when you're in poverty. So you're not at home in society, for example, to say. And I'm curious, like, as someone who experienced poverty, how did stigma show up in a day-to-day for you?
Well, I think a lot of it is, you grow up impoverished, and it's not a secret. You're wearing the wrong clothes, you're wearing hand-me-downs. They're threadbare. And so it's the looks that you'll get. It's a difficult thing to break away from as well. And I know this is well documented. It's a difficult thing to break away from poverty. It really is. It's a pattern that gets repeated over and over again for whatever reason. It's difficult to look back at it. It's difficult in the sense that you are treated differently, disdainfully, to be quite honest. There must be something wrong with you. Why don't you, I remember a class in grade 3 was having a birthday party, and I wasn't invited. The only one in class not invited. As it turned out, I wasn't invited because I probably couldn't afford a gift. When you're young, you don't know. You're the only one not invited. And
maybe you're like, oh, I don't know why these things manifest. But you said, what I heard you say was that you start feeling like there's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And maybe that starts to manifest as a root cause for other things in your life that can manifest, like addiction, mental health, depression, stuff like that.
Well, it's all tied up with your self-worth, isn't it? Yourself, and this is something I'm just finally coming around to, is how important self-worth is. When you feel like you don't belong, when you feel that there's something wrong, when you feel that you're not adequate, that somehow that does manifest in well, then screw it. And you're going to, be the rebel, with or without a cause. Or you start drinking heavily. You mask the true feelings.
Which I imagine are quite painful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. And I mean, and so, but it's amazing how, you can go 20 years and mask. I'm lucky to be here now. I should probably be dead under a tree somewhere. But it's a difficult thing to break free of.
And speaking of that, speaking of assumptions and breaking free of these feelings, one thing that's extraordinary about you now, having known you for 3 years, is that you're a very eloquent person and you're also a very talented writer.
Oh.
And I'm curious how writing came into your life.
Writing language to me, I've loved language. It all started in grade 11. A teacher, Miss Gray, after a class, she gave me The Hobbit because I had said in class, why are we reading Wuthering Heights? I mean, who wants to read this? She, for me, gave me a book that my love of language grew from there, blossomed from there. Somewhere in there, I thought perhaps I could become a writer. I could tell stories. And I just love to read. And reading was for me escapism. Getting away from the harshness of my life, all those disappointments, read a book. It's been shown that people who are well read are much more empathetic because they have gone through all those scenarios. I had read that in Able to Write, you needed to read a lot. So I read and read and read, and one book would lead to another, and you're reading the beats, and then, you're reading Nathaniel West, and that leads to this, that, and the other. And so I was in a rooming house. That is a theme in my life, rooming houses. It's my fallback position. Get a place, get a room at a rooming house. And I seriously started to write poetry. And I read, the reason I wrote poetry was because you can do it in short bursts. And so one day I had picked up a Charles Bukowski, Run with the Hunted, and I was like, wow. The first poem I ever read of Bukowski was about a flop house. And I'm like, you can write about this stuff? And so, yes, my writing was a little bit derivative, but boom. Before you know it, I was the epitome of the starving artist. I didn't have a work. I didn't have any money. I didn't, but I wrote every morning. And slowly but surely, my work started to get published. And self-worth again, Marco, self-worth. I felt like a fraud. I felt like someone was going to call me out. That's an original thought. What are you doing? Who do you think you are? You're a poet? I felt like a fraud. And I was proffered a job, and I took the work. And it's very difficult. People don't understand, but it takes a lot of energy to write. 4 hours a day. It's very difficult to do both. It's very difficult to work full time and then come home and give 5 hours to writing.
When you do write, where do you go?
I don't have it. Virginia Woolf talks about a place of your own, right? A room of your own. I don't have that room anymore. So my writing is sparse because I don't have that room.
Where did you go?
Oh, I had my room. I had an old computer set up in front of the window, and
Oh, I mean in your writing, where would you go?
oh, where would I go? What a question that is. You go to a magical place, Marco. They call it the flow. And sometimes you could get into it. It's like this wonderful stream, and Where would I go? I would, that's a good question. I don't know. Into language, I guess, the nomenclature, if you will. That's where I went. It's writing is a process. So there's days where you just dream and there's days where you edit. And so depending on the day would, that's where I would go. What a great question. When you're reading, you can put yourself into that scenario, that place, that time, that situation. You can place yourself there. But when you're writing, suddenly you're in your imagination. Yes, that's a great question.
And so now, as you mentioned, you're nearing an end of a recovery here. And I'm curious, obviously life is an ongoing process, but I'm curious, what are some things that you're looking forward to doing in the future?
I'm looking forward again, I think, with a bit of trepidation to my own space again, to have a room of myself again, I would hope in my sobriety, I would like to, I'm really, really thinking about mentorship. I seem to get along with the younger guys here in the house. For whatever reason, I'm that old crusty old guy. I'm the curmudgeon, right? But I've been there and I've been through the ringer. So when I talk to them about recovery, it's from a real place. It's not from a book. It's not from a school. It's not from a course. It's from life. The old school, I guess, eh? I don't know. Do they use that term anymore?
It comes up here and there.
I would like that. I really would. I see myself. I was always worried that when I moved out of Anawim House, there would be this severance, this finality. Well, that's not the case. I think I will stay closely affiliated with Anawim House. I think I need to. And perhaps I will be that counselor that allows, the young ones who I don't need counseling. It's a waste of time to realize that it's okay to talk. It's okay, to talk about trauma. I don't know. Again, it's I've drifted for so long. I'm finally getting tethered. I'm putting roots down here in Victoria, which is wonderful. Community. I have a family, and I get choked up all about that. But life is a work in progress, and I guess I am as well.
Dennis, thank you so much for your time today, and we're really looking forward to hearing your story.
Oh, thanks, Marco.
Can you leave us with a poem today?
This poem is 30 years old, probably. A lot of my early stuff was about heartbreak. It's always going to be about the human condition. I mean, that's what poets write about. There were long days sitting at my window of my rooming house. And so this is one of those poems. This poem was published by the University of Guelph. I've entitled it A Matter of Degrees. Streetlights cast branches of shadow onto his northeast facing window. The furnace has failed again. With an oversized earthenware crimson mug, his coffee a small fire, he warms his palms. However, this pre-dawn morning, it is not the frigid cold that keeps him awake. She has invaded his dreams, like disturbed and relentless bees. He cannot trust his sleep, his memories buried deep. These images of a first ardor, images that time refuses to taint, and with its brushstrokes paint sepia. So he sits before his bay window, staring out at the moribund night, tries to decipher what is undecipherable, what we endure, what we can endure, what we must endure. It's all a matter of degrees, he thinks, as the morning shadows dissolve into a cumbersome dawn.
You've been listening to the Existence Project podcast. If you want to hear more, check out our website, theexistenceproject.ca, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at The Existence Project.